All righty. So, good evening, everyone. I hope everyone is having a wonderful Wednesday. And thank you very much for joining me tonight for my webinar on to carb or not to carb. We'll kind of dive into some of the literature, the information, and hopefully give you a little bit more perspective on the almighty keto diet, which is, well, slowly falling down a little bit. It's still definitely a popular one, but intermittent fasting might be taking it over. But we'll dive into kind of some of the evidence and information around that. So let me just pull up my screen here. Alrighty. Perfect. Alrighty, everyone. So we'll get started here. So for those of you that are first time joining us, my name is Dr. Dan. I am a pharmacist by training, but turned weight management specialist. So obesity is the practice area that I have taken the time to focus and become really involved in. And so really understanding what are the ins and the outs and the modalities that lead to an individual's weight, why is weight loss so hard, and various other aspects around that. Oh, if that was intended. Nope, that was not. Let me figure that out here. Okay. There, that should be better. Hopefully that works for everybody. Anyways, as I was saying, and thank you for pointing that out. Yes, so I specialize in obesity and weight management, and I'm very excited to share with you guys this aspect of things and what it's all going to look like. You fixed it. Awesome. And in particular, we're going to focus around the keto diet and low carb diet as well. Obviously, they are definitely popular modalities at the moment, and a lot of people are jumping on board with them. And we're seeing more and more of things like the keto doc or the keto coach and the carnivore coach. So there's a number of different approaches that are kind of popping up, and everyone is saying it's the end all be all. And of course, the Dr. Googles of the world have very much taken some of the data and literature and possibly have over extrapolated it a bit. And the health claims that are around it may or may not be true, but we're going to find out. And for any questions or anything like that, my email and my contact info there is down at the bottom. It'll be show up again at the end of the presentation as well. So if you have questions following this, feel free to reach out, but we'll dive into it now. So just a few of my disclosures. I like to be as upfront as possible for everybody, and just to let you know that what I'm involved in, where I may have received funding sources and that sort of thing, as well. It's kind of just part of the medical community and something that we do with all of our presentations, just to disclose any possible areas of bias. We all have bias. It's impossible not to, but here's a few of mine. So I am the owner and the founder of Healthcare Evolution. I've done a number of consulting type gigs. And I work on a number of boards and have received funding from various other sources and stuff like that for some studies that I'm currently in the process of completing. As well, I am the co-president for the Obesity Canada Calgary chapter, and this presentation is entirely for free and hasn't received any kind of speaker's fee or support whatsoever. And just a quick note here, everything is being recorded. So for promotional purposes and future course development, if you ask any questions or anything like that, your personal information will be removed from the video and that sort of thing before it's uploaded onto kind of any websites or social media platforms. So today's learning objectives. First and foremost, we're just going to review what is the low carb and ketogenic diets? What is ketosis and how does that relate to the keto flu? And then finally, we're going to explore some of the evidence around the keto and low carb diets. So let's do a brief introduction here to start, starting with the macronutrients. So everybody's diet is essentially comprised of these three macronutrients. So macro meaning big, nutrients meaning nutrients, okay? So they're the big nutrients that come in our diet. Obviously there's micronutrients, which are vitamins and minerals and that sort of thing, but these are the three big ones that we comprise as most of our diets on a day-to-day basis. We have protein, and protein is pretty much the king. It's irreplaceable. It's used in repairing tissue, enzymatic reactions. It can be used as fuel. It has a whole plethora of effects throughout the body. And if you're going to get anything in your diet, protein is definitely one of the key sources we want to look at. Carbohydrates are the fuel that keep us going, the fuel that we put in our car. They allow us to do our day-to-day activities, and primarily that is what our bodies prefer to run on and run on a regular basis. And it also provides a number of our vitamins and nutrients and that sort of thing when we're looking at things like veggies, grains, that sort of thing. Fat, this is more of a long-term storage, but it can be used as a secondary fuel source. Generally, our body will store fat, obviously, on our bodies for later use. Always kind of wondering and thinking that it's, our world is 30,000 years ago, and being concerned about the possibility of starvation or the apocalypse, or who knows what could possibly happen in 2021 after 2020, but always having that energy reserve in place. It's also used for protection and insulation. So it protects other organs in our body, such as our kidneys, and it also helps to keep us warm. And it also plays some role in cellular regulation and signaling. Carbohydrates. So the main thing that we want to look at here, the big bad carbohydrates. Basically are digestive. So when we take in what are called complex carbs, I'm sure you've all heard of that, or simple sugars and that sort of thing. Basically, it all enters the digestive system, and the digestive system is breaking it down into its tiniest, smallest molecule, or what we call monosaccharides. So these are basically a single sugar molecule or a single glucose molecule. And you can see a nice little picture of it down in the corner here. That's kind of what an individual glucose molecule looks like. Now, there's a few other sugars, but this is just kind of a simplified overview here, and just want to make this the main focus. If you want to read up on them, you definitely can, but this is kind of the main guy that we're looking at today. So glucose in our body gets absorbed, taken up, put into the bloodstream. And, that's what our blood sugar levels are. Insulin gets released when we have blood sugars and sugars coming into our system, and insulin helps to bring our blood sugar levels down. So insulin, what it does is kind of like a key. It opens up the door on your various cells throughout the body, whether it's muscle cells, liver cells, you name it, and allows sugar to go from your bloodstream inside of the cells so that the cells can do the cell things. It can keep you alive, keep you active, and that sort of thing. Now, in terms of storage and other things, the liver will store it as glycogen. So basically, it takes in each individual glucose molecule and forms it into a complex structure that still can be easily broken down, but essentially is more capable of being stored rather than a bunch of little single glucose molecules floating around. The liver does, or the muscle throughout your body does the same. Now, the big difference between the muscle and the liver is that the liver tends to share its glucose. It's very caring and wants to make sure the rest of the body is in good form and good shape, particularly our brain, which is a glucose hog. And so it will provide glucose and sugar to the rest of the body when it's in need. So if you've fasted for a period of time, what have you, it'll be able to share its glycogen as to what it has. As well, when the glycogen storage, there's no more left, it can actually start to produce more glucose as well and engage in a process called gluconeogenesis, so making new glucose essentially. Whereas the muscle tends to be very selfish. It wants to hold on to as much glucose as it can and not release anything, because that could potentially might need it to run away from a bear or zombies or you name it. Now, primarily when glucose comes into the system, it gets prioritized to the cells that need it first. So the brain, the liver, the muscle, that sort of thing. And then, we'll get into that in a second here. As well, when it gets taken up into our cells, glucose tends to take a number of water molecules with it. So we always talk about this thing of water weight and dropping water weight. That's kind of what we're talking about, is that the water is being taken up by the glucose inside of our muscles, and sometimes can cause that water weight or that swelling, and maybe that's why we see a bump in the scale sometimes. So, acceptable macronutrient distribution. So I wanted to provide this to you guys just to kind of give an idea of what the general, North American diet might look like, and what percentage of that diet is kind of comprised of various components. So protein can range anywhere from 10 to 35%. Obviously, the higher end of 35% is a high protein diet. Carbohydrates make up about 45 to 65% of the average diet, and fat makes up about 5 to 10% of that. So the average North American diet person consumes about 250 to 350 grams of carbs per day. Obviously, that varies person to person, body size, training, all that various kind of thing. There's a whole bunch of other factors that go into it, so it's going to vary person to person. So just to give you a quick math example here, just in case you're I always like to just add a few more details. So just to kind of play it out, if you're looking at, say, an 1,800 calorie a day diet, so how would you determine your distribution of macronutrients? And we're just going to look at protein as being 25% of your diet. So what we know is protein is 4 calories per gram, carbs are 4 calories per gram, and fats are also 9 calories per gram. So obviously fats, for every gram of fat, there's a lot more energy contained in there. So kind of something to keep in mind in that sense. And that's why fat generally makes up less of our diets. But to figure out what 25% or how many calories that is of your daily intake, what you do is protein, 25%. You take 25% of 1800, which comes out to be 450 calories of protein. And in order to figure out how many grams of protein that is, you take that 450 and you divide it by the 4 calories per gram. And that gives you how much grams of protein you eat in a day if your protein intake is 25%. Vice versa, you can do that for carbohydrates, fat, and that sort of thing. So what are these low carb diets and ketogenic diets? So low carb diet, generally it's a carb intake of less than 45%. So I showed you that macro distribution, that was kind of over a space, and your carb intake is going to be probably at the bottom end or less than that, varies person to person, and there's really no clear definition as to what a low carb diet exactly equals. Low carb diets kind of are more popular in terms of the Atkins and paleo. I'm sure some of you have tried both of these diets and probably have some familiarity with them. And also the fat to protein ratios and how much of those two things you eat is going to vary on a regular basis. Now the ketogenic diet. So the ketogenic diet is interesting and it falls under the low carb diet, but it's kind of an ultra low carb diet, if you will. Originally, it actually was developed in the early 1900s in order to treat epilepsy in children that were non-responding to anti-seizure medications. So really interesting history around that. And there's actually some evidence to show that that is the case and it still could potentially be used in that respect of things. However, again, there's differences in definitions and that sort of thing, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But essentially, when we're looking at a ketogenic diet, your carb intake is to be less than 5%. So 5% of your daily intake. And generally, it's a high fat diet. So your fat will replace the carbohydrate as your kind of energy source. And your fat content should be about 70% of your diet. And then whatever's kind of left over is going to be your protein. Basically, we want to reach this state of ketosis. But first, before we dive into that, I just want to talk about how and why the keto diet is so popular. And this really has kind of come out of what they call the carbohydrate insulin theory of obesity. And it's this theory that largely has been debunked, although there's still some very prominent individuals that will promote it and ultimately trying to sell the product. But if you've ever heard of Dr. Jason Fung or that group of individuals, they're big proponents in saying that insulin is the reason why we have the obesity epidemic. So insulin is, they call it the fat storage hormone, which technically is true. Insulin does help with the storage of fat. But as we were kind of talking about earlier, when it comes to glucose coming into the system, what the body is essentially doing is it's going to prioritize first the glucose to the cells that need it. So muscle cells, liver cells, brain cells, that sort of thing. And then when everybody else is topped up, they're happy, gas tanks are all full, that sort of thing. And if there's any glucose left over, well, then it's going to go, okay, well, now we'll store it as fat. And ultimately it gets stored as fat. And so what happens then is that you have to have an excess amount of glucose around or an excess amount of calories. So it's not automatically just storing things as fat. There has to be that excess amount around. And the whole idea as well is that carbohydrates, when they're high, insulin's high. And if your insulin levels are high, you can't lose weight because it's storing fat, which we're finding is just not the case. And so I'll show you a couple of studies of what kind of debunk that. But for a more detailed explanation, you can check out my YouTube channel, Dr. Dan, Weight Loss via Habit Mastery. I go into a lot more detail about how insulin has been kind of demonized and wrongly so in my opinion. But that's kind of one of the reasons why it's so popular and gained so much traction in recent years. So when most people think about the keto diet, they think about the bacon. I hear this all the time. People get really excited about, oh, I can eat bacon every morning. I can have delicious steak, all these wonderful foods that, we used to be harmful for us, but apparently I can eat them on the keto diet and I can lose weight while doing it. So people get really, really excited about that. However, not generally the recommendation I make there. I'll dive into that reason a little bit more. But when we're looking at ketogenic type foods, so if you're considering it, that sort of thing, your protein sources are going to be coming from maybe animal sources, so seafood, eggs. You want to look at healthy sources of protein, of course. You can still follow a vegan style diet and do a ketogenic diet. It becomes definitely more challenging because a lot of the protein sources that is used when following a vegan diet are often carb heavy. So it becomes a lot more challenging, but it is possible. When we start looking at the fat sources, a lot of people, like I said, get focused on the processed foods, the bacon, the steaks, that sort of thing, butters, all those wonderful things. But we really should be focusing more on the polyunsaturated fats because those are general just healthier for you. And we should be avoiding still the saturated fats and that sort of thing, regardless if you're losing weight or not. When it comes to veggies, people really start demonizing veggies when, in my opinion, all veggies are good. But, things like carrots apparently have more sugar in them and more carbs. So you, God forbid, cannot have them while you're on a keto diet. That's just a big no-no. Again, that's, how hardcore are we going to go with all of this? And yeah, so it's really a complex, but here's kind of an idea of some of the foods that you would eat on a ketogenic diet. Here's a list of some of the types of ketogenic diets that are out there that you might hear. So the standard ketogenic diet is primarily what most individuals do. Very low carb, moderate protein, high fat. Like I said, it has that general distribution. About 10% is your carbohydrate intake. Excuse me. Cyclic ketogenic diet is also one that I see quite frequently. And this diet involves being on a keto diet for a number of days and then having high carb days. So some people will follow that aspect of things. So they're still getting carbohydrates and that sort of thing and doing what's called a refeed here and there. How well that works is questionable at this point, but those are the two main diets, and those are the two main diets that we've primarily studied in the literature. These other ones, targeted ketogenic diet or high protein ketogenic diet, these are more used in performance athletes and that sort of thing if they're trying to tweak their nutrition or what have you. Really, we don't have a lot of data around these two just because there's a lot more variabilities and much harder to study, and they're not the mainstream kind of diets. Like I said, they're more in athletes and such like that. So again, a sample ketogenic diet here for you. This is kind of the foods that you would eat on a day-to-day basis. Obviously, high protein, lots of fat, very little carbohydrates. Spinach salad has very little carbs, that sort of thing. Almonds, nuts, that sort of thing. Yeah, so a lot of, well, hopefully veggies. There isn't a lot in that diet example, but definitely veggies are going to be a big part of that to maintain your fiber and stuff like that. So what is ketosis? So ketosis is the state, and this is the state that we want to reach in order to attain a ketogenic diet or be following ketogenic diet. Now, all of us to some degree have been in a state of ketosis here and there. Generally, after we wake up in the morning and we haven't eaten all night because we've been sleeping, our glycogen stores from our liver are depleted, and we've likely started to start using our fat stores. And so our body has gone into somewhat of a ketosis type state at that point in time. But the way that a keto diet or ketosis essentially works is after a low carb diet and depleting your glycogen stores, your body is going to turn to the fat. It's going to break down fatty acids into what are called ketones. Now, obviously, this is a mechanism that is built into the body. It's nothing new. It's remnants of our caveman ancestors. And essentially, it was in place because we didn't know when our next meal was going to come. We didn't know if we would have carbohydrates. We didn't know when food was going to be there. So when we would go long periods without food, basically this state of ketosis would keep in so that we could burn our fat and still, hunt and gather and do all the things that we need to do to stay alive. Ketone bodies, variety of tissues, and yeah, the body can basically switch over to it. And it takes about 4 to 5 days for that to occur. Generally, the amount of carbohydrates has to be less than 50 grams of carbs. I would argue probably somewhere between 20 and 30, but again, it's very individualized on what you would need to reach your own state of ketosis per se. But to give you some perspective, 50 grams of carbs is like 3 slices of bread. 20 grams of carbs is about 1 slice of bread per day. So obviously very, very, very low in carbohydrates, and can be extremely challenging because literally everything has carbs in it. If you ever look at a nutrition label that you think is just going to have protein and fat or what have you, there's likely some carbohydrates in it, short of like pure oils or something like that. A quick note though, is that fiber doesn't count. So if it says fiber on the nutritional label, fiber doesn't count to the amount of carbs because fiber is not digested. It just goes through our system and we basically pass it in our stools. The keto flu. So what is that all about? When first starting a ketogenic diet, these are some symptoms that are often reported by individuals, and it varies person to person on whether you experience them or not. I have personally done a ketogenic diet, and I didn't have too many of these symptoms. I definitely had constipation, some nausea, and definitely sugar cravings, but it varies person to person on how bad these will be. They usually occur within the first 1 to 2 weeks, and then what the kids are all saying is that you become fat adapted at that point in time. And when you're fat adapted, your body has basically switched its enzymatic processes and metabolism engines and stuff like that to be able to run fully on ketone bodies. And essentially, yeah, you're no longer running or not as efficient running on glucose and that sort of thing. So it takes a little bit of time. It's this whole process that you go through. But yeah, these are some of the interesting symptoms that you definitely could experience. Now, some people, like I said, experience little to none, and some people have very overt symptoms to the point where they just can't continue because they just feel that horrible. Ongoing symptoms long term, generally constipation for sure, usually because of a lack of fiber. So that's why veggies are so important on this diet. And a lot of people will, depending on which part you're swinging and stuff like that, will have a reduction in fiber and not be consuming enough of it. Ongoing, maybe a decrease in performance. Now, it depends on what you're looking at. When we look at, say, endurance athletes, keto diet might be good for them and actually help them to increase their performance potentially. But when we're looking at more strength athletes, so weightlifting or sprinters and that sort of thing, we might actually see a decrease in performance. So varies person to person and how effective, and really it's an evolving area. Just trying to see what's optimal. And obviously in terms of athletes and Olympics, they're always looking for any edge or advantage. And if this provides it, then they're going to go for it. As well as increased thirst is definitely something. Like I said, your body's not going to be probably holding as much water because there's no sugar to be taking up extra water. So you're going to have an increase in thirst and likely be wanting to drink more. Now, a quick note on ketoacidosis, just in case you go and start Googling what's a keto diet and that sort of thing. Ketoacidosis is usually not an issue for healthy individuals unless it's a very, very prolonged low carb diet. There has been case reports. And as well, we see this more in type 1 diabetes, where individuals don't have enough insulin and their body starts to produce ketones. And ketones are are acidic in our body. So they'll raise the acidity of our blood. And that causes all kinds of metabolic changes and that sort, and can be life-threatening. It can definitely end them up in the hospital. And a number of people with type 1 diabetes have definitely passed away because of ketoacidosis. So for most people, like I said, if you don't have diabetes, you're not on insulin, that sort of thing, likely is not going to be an issue for you. But it's more of a risk for type 1 diabetes and definitely not recommended in that group. But some symptoms to kind of be wary of would be like increased thirst, vomiting, peeing, abdominal pain is a big one, dry, flushed skin, trouble breathing, and that sort of thing. So how do we know someone is in ketosis? Question that I always get. Generally, you could probably feel to some degree if you had the keto flu symptoms and they passed and you've been following a relatively regular diet. That should kind of give you an indication. But there's also a couple other ways. You can pick up these ketone strips at the pharmacy. Basically, you pee into a cup, put the strips in it, and it'll kind of tell you based on the color and darkness how many ketones are in your pee because they get excreted out of our urine. As well, this Keto Coach, this is quite an expensive little monitor. I was looking into it, is all the rage right now, and people are poking their finger and getting a blood sample to see what their level of ketones are at that point in time. You can go that extreme if you want. It's not really a big deal. It's personally, it doesn't really matter how many, or the literature says anyways, that it doesn't matter how much ketones you have in your system or your blood as to whether you're going to get the most benefit or not. But I think some of the diet zealots out there will say that, well, the more ketones you have, the more fat you're burning, which isn't true in any kind of form or fashion. So what are the health claims of the ketogenic diet? And I always love when I type these things into Google, just because the things that pump out is absolutely ridiculous and crazy. And by no means is this list exhaustive. This is just kind of the ones that I did and looked into in terms of the literature and the research. To some degree anyways. But yeah, lots of different things and claims that really come out about it. And we'll kind of dive into some of the evidence now. So what does the evidence say? So when we're first looking at the epilepsy, I already said it is definitely something that can occur. So originally was developed in the 1900s. We don't exactly know how it's helping. It might have some kind of calming effect in the brain, or the ketones might have a protective effect, that sort of thing. Really, really difficult to understand and say what might be kind of going on there. But many studies have shown it to be effective. And the one main issue that we often come down to is that the long-term sustainability, that becomes challenging. I mean, it's already hard enough for adults to do it. And yes, adults with children, they can kind of control what the kid is eating and stuff like that. But again, they're a kid, they're going to be pickier eaters, that sort of thing. There's all kinds of challenges that come with that. But it could be something to look at with your care team, and definitely touching base with a pediatric neurologist if this is your situation or your case. As well, there's some data for adults as well. Oops. All right. Reduced cravings and appetite. So this is one of the things that I probably will give the keto diet its praise for, is that having ketones in your blood seems to reduce your cravings and appetite. How much that is kind of up for debate, but it seems that it can be beneficial in that respect. And big in part is that when we're in a calorie restriction, when we're losing weight, what our body is going to compensate and do is it's going to make you more hungry. And in particular, the foods that you usually don't like, it's going to make them taste good because it wants fuel. Your body is saying, hey, this isn't a good thing. This is a bad thing. We need more fuel. We need it now. And so, yeah, it's going to try and get you to eat more food. As I said, so may help manage it, but let's see kind of some graphs here. So what I want to show you guys here is this is a forest plot. And this was one from one systematic review where they looked at a whole pile of studies that looked at ketogenic diets. And they kind of asked a number of different scales and different metrics and that sort of thing to determine if individuals were experiencing increased fullness or satiety. So were they more satisfied with the food? Were they feeling fuller after meal? That sort of thing. And the line here means no change, no difference. And on the other side here, the opposite from the increased fullness and satiety means there was a decrease in fullness and satiety. And it looks like a majority of the studies that they found, there was, I think, 9 here in total, did find that there was an increase in satiety. Now, we generally want to see these lines that are coming from these dots to not touch this middle line because then it's statistically significant. So we can put more weight in saying that it did have a significant benefit. And that really only occurred in 4 studies, but the overall, looking at all the studies put together, this little blue triangle or diamond at the bottom here shows that it likely does increase fullness and satiety, okay? So it affects that factor. The other aspect is decreasing hunger or decreasing appetite. So this was kind of an interesting aspect. This was done in the same systematic review. And looking at the metrics around this, technically none of the studies that they looked at were statistically significant. So that kind of, we can't really say that, did it really decrease the hunger? Well, there was a trend that maybe it did. And if we look at this little blue diamond here, it's leaning towards the side that it may decrease hunger. So maybe not so much an effect on the appetite component, but likely has more of an effect on the satiety and the fullness factor. So that is kind of maybe the 1 or 2 benefits that come with the ketogenic type diet. All right, weight loss. Does it have a benefit in that? And this is true-ish. So definitely can be effective for weight loss. It's nothing special about the keto diet per se. What's the thing that's happening here is just that you're in a calorie restriction, calorie deficit. And that's what has occurred. It's not the fact that you've cut out the carbs that leads to the weight loss. It's the fact that, yes, you cut out the carbs, but you've in turn also decreased the amount of calories that you're consuming on a day-to-day basis. And therefore, you are now in a calorie deficit, and that leads to weight loss. So it can be effective in that respect. And I kind of want to show you guys this graph. So this was another systematic review that was done. And they compared a number of different diets to no diet whatsoever. And just to give you a breakdown, this learn here, basically this is just general lifestyle intervention. So if you were to go to a doctor or the clinician, they probably said, eat healthier, maybe move more, that sort of thing. There really wasn't too much around it that was the specifics or anything. It was just kind of, try to be healthier. And then the moderate macro is just kind of a moderate macronutrient distribution. So it wasn't any extremes of, high protein, low fat, anything like that. It was just kind of probably more on par with what a standard diet was and focused on weight loss. Then we have low carb and low fat. Now, what's very interesting is that at 6 months, you can see across the board here that just general lifestyle, about 6 kilos were lost. In the moderate macro distribution, almost 7 kilos, not bad. In the low carb diet, well, this looks really good. At 6 months, we see almost 9 kilos lost. And that was more than anybody else at 6 months. Even the low-fat diet only got to about 8 kilos, so that's really exciting, right? However, the orange bars are at 12 months, and what we see at 12 months is that pretty much every diet across the board, and what we know with every single diet out there, is that there is likely some weight regain at that point, and that's why it's so important to have these longer term studies, because they really look at how effective a diet is long term. Nonetheless, the participants in the low carb and the low fat group did manage to keep the weight off, but as you can see, there was really no difference in the weight loss at the 12-month period. So great initial weight loss, and I'll get into that in a second, but at 12 months, it all just kind of evens out and really shows that it's no better than any other diet, other than the moderate macro and the lifestyle intervention. And these are all compared to no diet overall. So no diet, no plan, still some benefit, and 8 to 9 kilos. That's not bad. I mean, it's a significant amount, and for many individuals, that might be greater than 10%. That might be at less than 10% of their starting body weight. Nonetheless, that's kind of an average that we definitely see in some of the literature. So greater initial weight loss. I have so many patients that get excited about this, because generally when people start a ketogenic diet, they see a huge drop on the scale, like instantaneously within the first 1 or 2 weeks. Now, again, going back to that water weight concept and that glycogen that gets stored in our liver and our muscles, when we're on a low carb diet, ketones don't get stored in the liver or the muscle. They basically are just produced kind of as needed. And so if we're not putting in glycogen, that glycogen, A, is not going to be there and be stored in our muscles and our liver, increasing our weight. It's also not going to carry the water with it. And so you're going to fundamentally just weigh less. And what we see here is that on a day-to-day basis, the fat that was being lost was exactly the same between various diets in the ketogenic diet. The ketogenic diet did show a greater loss per day, but it was just water and glycogen. And so if you eat a carb or a piece of bread, that weight is just going to disappear, and the amount of weight you'll lose in a day is going to bounce to the mixed diet. So it really shows that there is no difference in this respect. Starvation diet, that was a whole other bag of worms. But again, starvation diet, they literally starved people. It was kind of like a prison camp type deal. Ethically, we can't do that anymore, but it was definitely some interesting results and really showed some fascinating perspectives from there. But as you can see, there was a significant difference between that and even the keto and the mixed diet bag of things. So greater initial weight loss, yes, but it's going to, as you saw at 12 months on the previous slide, going to kind of go away after some point in time. And really, it's just water and glycogen, not actual fat loss. All right, and I put this one in here because this just came out in 2021, and this is really kind of a hit to the carnivore individuals. So one of the ketogenic facets or parties, if you will, is the carnivore diet. So people are really, really bent on this and saying that carnivore or all animal-based meals are what you should be eating. You should be eating protein and nothing but, chicken, steak, bacon, you name it. And it's the best thing ever. It's great for your health. It puts you in ketosis, and plants are, something that we shouldn't eat. What they found in this study, so they did a comparison. So what they did is on the left here, this was the animal-based ketogenic diet. So as you can see, blue is fat, so a large amount of fat. The red is protein, a large amount of protein, and the green is the carbohydrate, very little. And then they compared it to a plant-based diet that was low in fat. So this was entirely a vegan, vegetarian type diet, and obviously high in carbohydrates, so large amount there, minimal fat, and then a decent amount of protein. And what they actually found is that the individuals that were on the plant-based diet, they first consumed less energy. So they were allowed, both groups were allowed to eat as much or as little as they wanted. And the plant-based people just ate less than the animal-based diet people. And so that automatically is going to show that, well, if they continue that long period, that's eventually going to lead to fat loss. And what ended up showing at the end of the study, at day 14 in this metabolic chamber, essentially, they showed that the people that were on the plant-based diet actually lost more weight compared to the people that were on the animal-based keto type diet. So very, very fascinating. So kind of another point to the plant-based diet that it may be actually better to, one, help you to feel fuller and more satisfied and eat less because it's going to have more veggies and sort of thing, but also provide better weight loss results, which is fantastic. That's awesome. And just to kind of give you guys, so it was Kevin Hall and his group. It was a 2021 paper, just came out, and this image was actually adapted from an individual on Instagram that I follow, BDC Carpenter. if you want to give him a follow there, he has put out some really, really great content, and yeah, kind of saves me from making it. So little shout out to him. Diabetes. So this is the other big area that it's being looked at is, can it manage our blood sugars? Well, yes, it definitely can. Makes sense, right? You're eating less carbohydrates, you're eating less sugar, so that's going to have a decrease on your blood sugar levels. And yeah, many studies demonstrate that it reduces blood sugar, reduces A1C, helps with weight loss, and may even reduce your risk of cardiovascular disease. However, many of the studies have been short in nature, and what we see again in the long-term trials is that after a while, at 12 months out, that sort of thing, is that the benefits on your blood sugar levels seem to disappear. And big in part is that people start going back to their old habits, old ways, and the keto diet just isn't sustainable for them long term. So if you can sustain it and you can maintain the changes, well, yeah, you're going to get the benefit. But if you go back to your old ways and old habits and stuff, well, any benefit that you did receive is essentially going to go away. And there's a lot of other literature that has shown something similar. Again, if you're on insulin or have type 1 diabetes, I highly recommend that you avoid it, or you have a very intensive conversation with your physician or specialist. And even then, I would still not recommend it as a method for weight loss or managing your sugars in those situations. And then I kind of jumbled this one all together in terms of looking at, improving your heart and brain health, cancer, migraines, and acne. Really nothing magical in this literature. In fact, it might actually worsen your heart health by increasing your LDL. Very unfortunate in that respect. Brain health, it might affect Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease, but the data is very, very limited. Migraines, really minimal to no evidence. Acne might actually cause more acne. Having a high-fat diet increases the sebum in your skin, and sebum is kind of the main particle that primarily drives acne development and stuff like that. So it can potentially increase your acne. And then cancer. This is a really interesting area of research. And what the idea is that cancer or tumors feed on primarily glucose and sugar. So the idea is that if we can starve those tumors, we can at least make chemotherapy and other regimens more potent and more effective by starving them and by being on a keto diet. Not necessarily recommended by any oncologist at this point in time. There really isn't enough data to say whether it's a benefit or not, but interesting finding and data nonetheless, and to be seen, I guess you could say. So just want to review a couple of the risks here. What this graphs are showing you here is basically the higher the amount or the higher greater exposure to LDL that you have, essentially the greater risk of having a cardiovascular event, which could be a heart attack or a stroke. And so obviously this blue line has the greatest amount of exposure to LDL, and we can definitely see the trend as your age goes up, your risk of having a cardiovascular event goes up with it. Now, a lot of people, what they get wrong with the ketogenic diet is they go very much to carnivore. They get a lot of high cholesterol foods, a lot of saturated fats, which cause the cholesterol levels to rise, even if they're losing weight, even if they're doing all these good things, and fundamentally can put them likely at a higher risk of having a cardiovascular event. So being very mindful of that, if this is something that you are looking at or even considering, there is very real risks that are associated with it. Other risks that we sometimes will hear about may worsen liver or kidney problems. Again, the keto flu, hypoglycemia in terms of the diabetes, constipation, and oftentimes I see, because not enough people get enough nutrients on it and they've limited the carbs so much and don't get enough veggies, we can see nutritional deficiencies as well. Practice experience, it's kind of a tough one. Many patients I see fail on it. Either they've see me after they failed on it, and now we're kind of working and trying to go from baseline and pick them back up after they've had this failed weight loss attempt. Or they come to me and they are currently on a ketogenic diet and are, die hard to stay on it because they were so excited by the initial weight loss, and they keep striving and trying to see if they can get that big initial drop again, and it just never comes. And eventually when the scale stops moving, suddenly most people realize that, hey, I really like carbs and this diet sucks, and they end up going back to their old habits and old ways and gain all the weight back. And there's a huge big increase in weight initially because they're refilling their water and glycogen storage, and very, very disheartening. It causes all kinds of issues in that aspect of it as well. I see people that constantly cycle on and off. They're like, oh, I'll go keto for a while, or I got Mexico coming up, I'm going to go keto, or summer's coming up, and try to lose a bunch of weight in that sense. And then they go back to eating a heavy carb diet. This cycling back and forth, or even the refeed day on the cyclic ketogenic diets, may actually potentially be harmful. There's some interesting data that's starting to come out That's showing that if your body is not used to the extra glucose and sugar in the system and suddenly you dump a whole bunch into it, may not be a good thing. It may lead to some potential issues and such. In terms of actual treatment, I may recommend it in type 2 diabetes or PCOS. There is some data, like I said, that shows it is beneficial. More often than not, what I kind of do in these conditions is it's more just reducing your portions. And that actually provides the benefit more than anything, because reducing your portions ultimately reduces the amount of calories. And fundamentally, that's where we start seeing the benefit and helping with insulin resistance and stuff like that can come with type 2 diabetes and PCOS. The biggest thing, as I always see, is that, and always say, is that it's got to be sustainable. If it's not sustainable, you aren't going to be able to stay on it long term. So if you are looking at it, where to start? I never say that you have to go to full ketosis. I don't really believe that. As I said, start with reducing your portions. Your carbohydrate should be about a quarter of your plate, or about the size of your fist. A little bit more if you're doing more exercise and training and stuff like that. And look at increasing your protein and veggies. And often what'll start happening is that you'll see this balance start occurring, and the weight loss will just kind of come with it in a sense. Versus having to go into a full state of ketosis and being kind of, well, what I say is not the funnest time in terms of ketosis and that sort of thing. So that's kind of that perspective there. And I know this question is going to come up. What about the ketone supplements to increase ketones in your blood and stuff like that and further help that process? Don't waste your money. It is definitely not worth it. If you're looking to spend money somewhere, I will happily open up a charity to pay off my student loans, and you can all donate to that, and I will happily take it. I cannot promise a tax receipt, but let me know for sure. All right, so that's my presentation. Want to do a quick plug here for everybody. Intermittent fasting, we're going to be talking about this next month, March 17th at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Very much similar to this presentation here. And kind of dive into some of the evidence around it and why it's so popular and that sort of thing. So I hope you guys will join us for that one. We killed it on this one in terms of selling out completely, which was absolutely fantastic. So I really appreciate the support and you guys coming out and seem to enjoy listening to me talk. In terms of connecting, tons of places and resources. So if you don't get to ask your question tonight, we're going to do a live QA here right after this. You can definitely check me out at these various channels and pages, Dr. Dan-Healthcare Evolution, and my YouTube channel. As I said, you can see more about insulin and that sort of thing and a few other topics there. As well, the Facebook page, we have a Facebook group. So if you want kind of a safer environment that's regulated and moderated, like me on the Dr. Dan Healthcare Evolution page, and I can ask or add you to our HE family with Dr. Dan. And it's a group where you can share your struggles, triumphs, that sort of thing. And of course, if you want to shoot me an email, that is my email, and that is our website, healthcareevolve.ca. So we do provide support to individuals currently living in Canada. Our team helps them and supports them through lifestyle modification and changes to manage their weight and live a healthier lifestyle. So that's it. We'll dive into the Q&A, and I see there's already a couple of questions up there. If you haven't got the slides yet, they should be distributed via email. If you didn't get them, please let me know and I can shoot you a copy so that you have them on hand. And thank you. All right, so we'll do a bit of a Q&A right now, and you can see my face is a little red. It's really hot in my room today. But I'll take some questions here. So I've got two to start. If you guys want to just pop them into the Q&A or in the chat, what have you, and we can kind of go from there. And I believe Kia is going to help me out if there's any that are asked on Facebook. She will copy and paste them here for me so I can see what we got going on. But for Gabriella Williams, in your opinion, who should do the standard keto diet? Who should do the cyclic keto diet, and who should do the high protein keto when it comes to fat loss? In terms of the three different or the multiple different diets and who should do what and stuff, it's impossible for me to kind of say who should do which one and those sorts of things. It's going to depend what works for you ultimately. Whatever diet is going to be more sustainable for you if you want to go down the road of a ketogenic type diet. It's going to be ultimately what you think you can manage and what you can work with. As I said, the cyclic ketogenic diet, there might be potential harms with that of kind of continuously going into keto and then adding in carbs. Again, the data isn't very robust in that area, but it's kind of growing at the moment. So something to be mindful in that respect. Standard ketogenic diet is what I would recommend for a majority of my patients to at least start at if that's what they wanted to go down. And see if it worked for them. If it didn't, what have you, then we can kind of address it and go from there. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts. In terms of the other two, I probably wouldn't have enough experience and knowledge around that, and I would look more at the athletes and performance nutritionists and dietitians and stuff like that to kind of have a conversation in that respect. Um, Gabriella, so do I count the carbs from my vegetables? You do. So vegetables still contain some carbohydrates and stuff like that. Like I said, there's going to be more of um, a fiber component there as well. So you can exclude the fiber component, but you definitely still need to include the carbohydrate component that might be contained in there, as that certainly can contribute to your overall carb amount for the day. Thank you for the good presentation. My question is, what are your thoughts about meal replacements to assist with lifestyle modifications at the beginning, such as OptiFast, for example? So, yeah, great question. So, OptiFast, or even just meal replacements in general, if you're having liquid calories, that can be problematic in terms of long-term sustainability. We do feel more hungry when we're eating more liquids and that sort of thing, or at least that's what I find personally. But at the same time, I also have like a protein shake as one of my snacks through the day with some fruits and veggies and stuff because it's quick, it's on the go, and I can kind of go do my thing. So it kind of varies on your schedule and what's going to fit into your schedule again, very individualized around what fits for your life. OptiFast, we do use it for individuals that are prepping for bariatric surgery. So if there's a large amount of weight that we want to lose, or even just to get some weight off prior to the surgery to make the surgery a little bit safer and easier, OptiFast might be an option that we will look at and has some decent evidence to definitely help. It does provide the nutrients and stuff like that. If you're looking at just more that extreme side where everything's going to be becoming liquid, or you are prepping for bariatric surgery, definitely talking with a dietitian who's a lot more expertise in that area to make sure that it's being done safely and appropriately and we're getting all the micronutrients and stuff like that. But again, if it's meal replacement for like a meal here and there, because that's just the way life is, totally okay. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. What are your thoughts on consuming sucralose on the keto diet when you want to lose fat and reverse insulin resistance? Sucralose. So I had a number of conversations around this in terms of all the sweeteners and stuff like that. When we look at the evidence, there's a lot of observational trials that show that sweeteners may potentially be harmful. However, this hasn't been replicated really in the interventional trials. So observational trials is basically we look at a group of people over a period of time. Either we look back in time or we say, all right, we're going to take the people in the Calgary healthcare system, for example, or AHS, for example, and we're going to take this group of people and we're going to watch them over a couple of year period and give them questionnaires here and there and that sort of thing and try to assess what their sweetener intake and stuff like that is. And observational data, I mean, there's a number of confounding variables that can kind of come into it, and some other issues because we're observing, we're not necessarily controlling all the different factors. And what we have found is that often those observational trials, when we correct for all the confounders, like for things like say obesity or other comorbidities, all the risks that are associated or seen in the observational trials tend to disappear. So that's very interesting. The other big piece that we're kind of, I think, missing and has been noted in some editorials is that we're not people that are drinking more sweeteners. What might have happened is that up to that point in time or a certain point in their life, they're actually drinking sweetened beverages, which we do know have an increased risk of causing metabolic issues and stuff like that. And they were consuming them up to a certain point till they got pre-diabetes, insulin resistance, something like that. And they're kind of like, okay, well, I'm going to switch to diet soda now. And so then they switch to diet soda, and then we start capturing them in these observational trials at that point in time. And the damage may have already been done prior to that. It might not be the sweetener soda, but we're seeing it as the sweetened sodas and drinks and that sort of thing, where in reality, it already was done before that even happened. And we really haven't answered that question at this point in time. So that's kind of another factor. Interventional trials, those are kind of randomized controlled trials. So we have two groups and we control, one group gets sweetener, one group doesn't. And essentially we watch them through a period of time. And we just don't see the same outcomes and reports that are seen with the sucralose. So in my opinion, sucralose, I mean, I don't want you to go consume a 6-pack a day kind of thing. But, if you want to have a Diet Coke, a can of Coke, Diet Coke a day, go for it. I don't think there's probably not going to be any benefit, but there's not going to be any harm likely in it as well. Is a gallon of water per day good for weight loss and overall health? I mean, water, that is probably one of the big things that not nearly enough people get in a day to day. So, water is fantastic on so many levels. And a lot of individuals who talk to me about fatigue issues and other aspects of that, when they start consuming more water regularly and get just start increasing it upwards to where that 8 cups of water a day and that sort of thing, they actually start noticing all kinds of other benefits in terms of energy levels are improving, activity is getting better, all these various things. And yes, we can count water from things like coffee and other drinks as well as from food. We get a lot of water and stuff. But I always try to aim for, like, if you can start slowly increasing your water intake and getting actual water, like just drinking that. If you have maybe a little sweetener or something like that added to it, or meal or whatever, or I can't remember what those bubbling machines are called. I keep forgetting that. But you've added some, carbonate to it or whatever like that, then go for it. But you're still getting that fluid in, and that's going to have some pretty big benefits for you long term, and can really help your health. So, yeah, gallon of water a day, absolutely. Drink your water, get it in. Can definitely be beneficial, but start slow. If you're only drinking like 2 glasses a day right now, go to 3, then go to 4. Don't jump to 8 glasses because it's going to be way too much and you're not going to enjoy it because you are going to spend all day in the bathroom. When doing a lower carb plant-based diet, what does it considered low carb? What does it considered? What is considered low carb in terms of grams in a plant-based diet? What does the literature say there? Really, we're still, so fundamentally, to reach the state of ketosis, your carbohydrate intake is what we seem to see is that it has to be less than 50 grams. 20 to 50 grams is kind of the ballpark. So even on a plant-based diet, that's kind of the same aspect of it. In terms of low carb diet, 50 grams. So trying to aim for, I guess that would be between the 45% and that 5% that is for a ketogenic diet. That would be considered lower carb still. It still looks at the same macro distributions and stuff like that. And there really isn't a difference for, say, a plant-based diet that, well, the carbohydrate cutoff or whatever changes in that respect. It's more just going to be, lower carb from what the average in North America might be consuming and maybe what you're consuming as well. And so that's kind of a way to kind of think about it, I guess, in that sense. Again, the definitions as to what is low carb is really, really variable and kind of all over the place in terms of the literature, and there really is no concrete definition of what it is. Keto, we're a little bit closer because that's kind of more, you've probably got to be less than that 50 grams of carbs a day aspect of things. So that's one aspect and one thing to think about it in that respect of it. How do you overcome constipation if you're not eating carbs or fiber, beans, greens, etc.? Veggies. Veggies are full of fiber. Everybody should eat more veggies. If you take anything away from tonight, please eat more veggies. Always, always, always a huge benefit in terms of keeping things moving and stuff like that. That's my biggest recommendation in that sense, and plenty of veggies that you can get that from in terms of being on those kinds of diets and that sort of thing. As well, you could potentially look at fiber supplements and stuff as well, such as Metamucil and that sort of thing. However, the caveat to those is that if you don't consume enough water, it can cause worsening constipation and that sort of thing. So veggies are kind of your go-to and best bets, as well as drinking plenty of water and stuff. And yeah, just trying your best to get that fiber and other methods and other modalities in that respect. Next question here. Can you comment on metabolic adaptation with calorie restriction? At what point does this happen, and is there evidence to reverse this? Oh, fantastic question. So I've actually got a couple of YouTube videos on this. So if you're looking for, some more info on that, I've got one video out now, which is kind of a teaser, and then the second one will be coming out shortly. But metabolic adaptation. So there isn't really a cutoff again as to when it happens. What we know is that if you are in a calorie restriction and you've lost weight, or even if you're just in a calorie restriction of some kind, metabolic adaptation is going to occur. Your body is just going to kick in and say, like, okay, this is not good. We need to reduce how many calories we're burning. We need to become more fuel efficient. And for those of you that have never heard of metabolic adaptation, what essentially is occurring is that, say you started at 180 pounds and you drop down to 140 pounds, your resting metabolic rate, or how many calories you burn in a day just at rest, is going to be lower than an individual that is also 140 pounds but hasn't lost weight. So their resting metabolic rate is going to be higher than yours. And if they wanted to lose weight, they don't need to go in as much of a calorie deficit as what you are to overcome that calorie deficit. So at what point does that occur? Really, we don't know. Likely any kind of weight loss that you're experiencing and going through, there's going to be some degree of metabolic adaptation. As you go over time, it's going to probably get more and more significant. It's going to get to a point because your body can only physically slow down your metabolism so much, but it's going to definitely have that in place to try and get you to gain weight back. In terms of reversing it, yeah, the data in this area is kind of evolving and is really fascinating. So initially, there was what was called the Biggest Loser study. So the Biggest Loser study looked at contestants that participated in the Biggest Loser competition. I'm sure you've all heard of or seen that TV show. And they go through extreme diets and trainers yelling at them, et cetera, et cetera. We won't get into my problems with the actual show itself. But what they saw is that at the end of it, obviously, the individuals lost a bunch of weight and they had seen metabolic adaptation compared to individuals that, based on their height and weight, what they should be at. And then they followed up with these people 6 years later. And what they found is that many of them had not only gained the weight back, so they were back up to the original weight, but this metabolic adaptation was still in place. And so this kind of sparked this whole area of like, oh my God, like you're losing weight. And if you dare to try to lose weight, you're going to go into metabolic adaptation and screw up your body and you're screwed for life at that point in time. However, more research is starting to evolve and showing that it may not be, or that metabolic adaptation is still a thing, but it is definitely reversible. And what seems to be more the issue is that if you remain in a calorie restriction, so if you're constantly trying to stay on a low calorie diet, your body's going to continuously try to metabolically adapt because your body's going to be saying, hey, you're just not eating enough. So why, or you have spurts where you eat a whole bunch or you eat a little bit. And you cycle back and forth, and the body's going to say, screw this. Like I'm not going to increase our metabolism or anything because you're not eating at a respectable amount of calories for us to function properly on a regular basis. You're up and down with, you restrict, and then you binge, and that ultimately causes the weight to come back. So the body's getting what it wants, is it wants the weight to come back on, but you still are going to see that metabolic adaptation. But what we're seeing in the literature now is that individuals that lose weight and get down to say 180 to 140 pounds, if they then go to a maintenance diet or maintenance amount of calories that an individual at 140 pounds should be consuming on a daily basis, what actually happens is that the resting metabolic rate comes back up to where it should be at 140 pounds. So all of a sudden, you've now reversed that metabolic adaptation, which is really, really cool. Because now it's more like, okay, if you eat the proper amount of calories for your weight, maybe we can overcome that aspect and you can do maintenance for a while and then possibly lose more weight later on with further calorie restriction and kind of doing a bit of a cycling or what they call diet breaks. So it's an interesting area of the literature that's growing and evolving, still up for debate at this point in time, but that's currently what we're seeing. And yeah, so it looks like, yeah, you probably can. Holy Toledo. Okay. What are your thoughts on eating things like keto pizza, keto pancakes, keto syrup, keto strip, keto treats on keto while trying to lose fat? See, this is one of my other issues and one of my definite biases for the keto diet. I love pizza. I love just the full-on carb-filled pizza. And so I'm going to be a big advocate. If you want pizza, go have pizza. That's one downside that I'm finding with the keto diet world, is that they're trying to make all these delicious and amazing foods that are already perfect as is, and then trying to make them perfect and keto friendly. And some of them, they're not bad. Some of them, they're definitely missing the mark. So yeah, if you want to eat them and consume them, yeah, you definitely can. I mean, again, watching for how much saturated fats and cholesterol are in them and are they healthy balance and that sort of thing, definitely. But if you want to just eat pizza, go and eat pizza. Like that's going to kind of the aspect there. If you're having those cravings, you're likely restricting too much and your body is saying, hey, why don't we have pizza? And maybe that diet isn't sustainable for you long term. So something to think about. You can definitely have those things. They're really a lot of processed food, so be mindful of that. And yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on that, if you will. Can you still lose fat and reverse pre-diabetes if you do a low carb, high fat diet eating instead of keto every day? You know what? We have data to show. So the question is, can you lose fat and reverse prediabetes if you do a low carb, high fat diet, eating 130 grams of total carbs or less instead of keto every day? And we actually have diet or data that is showing that you can actually have a higher carbohydrate diet or normal carbohydrate diet and lose weight and reverse diabetes. So you don't have to be anywhere near low carb. You just got to be possibly losing weight. And ultimately, that can help to reverse your pre-diabetes or help to reduce your insulin resistance. So, yeah, absolutely. At 130 grams of carbs, you totally could. It's going to be managing all the other lifestyle stuff on a day-to-day and regular basis, and making sure that you're also getting plenty of activity in and that sort of thing, and finding changes that again are going to be sustainable for you long term. But really, any kind of diet, we're showing that yeah, we can reverse that insulin resistance and ultimately help you in that respect of things. So yeah, hopefully that answers that question. And does the amount of calories you consume still matter when on keto or low carb when you're trying to lose fat? So that's one of the biggest, or the insulin carbohydrates theory, is that you could eat a higher amount of calories and be in keto and still lose weight because you have lower levels of insulin. That's just not true. If fundamentally, to lose weight, you have to be in a calorie deficit. There's just no getting around that one way or another. So yes, you do have to be in that calorie deficit, whether you're in a state of ketosis while you're doing it. Awesome, fantastic. But the calorie deficit needs to occur because that's just the law of physics. It's the way our bodies operate, and our bodies can't go against the law of physics. If the calories that are going in are greater than the calories that are going out, you're going to gain weight. If they're less than the calories going out, then you will lose weight. But you've got to do that consistently over a period of time. And that whole idea that, keto allows you to eat more calories and still lose weight is just not true. It seems like it because people may feel fuller and more satisfied, which makes sense because fat is in general more filling and more satiating, because as we saw at the beginning there in those calculations, 9 grams or 1 gram of fat is equal to 9 calories versus 1 gram of carbohydrate is equal to 4 calories. So fat is more energy dense. Does it matter what kind of carbs are being consumed on a weight loss diet? Fast release carb versus slow release carb. So this is kind of another interesting area in terms of insulin resistance, insulin response, all that kind of stuff. I always talk about more of a balance. If you like, we should aim for more whole grains whenever we can. So going for things like brown rice, whole grains are things that, or whole foods, if you will. So humans have had less interaction with them or processed them, that sort of thing. So if you think about bread, the grains have been broken down, made into flour, we've baked it, we've added other things, blah, 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 blah. So that's how we kind of get bread. But then if we look at, say, rice or beans or something like that, humans have had a lot less processing and interaction with them. So we're better off to ultimately, they're likely going to be maybe healthier for us because they're a whole food. So we haven't interacted and processed them as much. So we should always aim to have more of those if we can. But if you're like a diehard white rice fan or something like that, you can still have white rice. It's just moderation in all things. And then just being mindful that, it might not be as filling and that sort of thing. But even then, the glycemic index stuff, yeah, it's kind of wonky in that. And I find we get too caught up in the details overall of worrying about, how many calories we're having, how many grams of this, how many grams of that. And then we got to worry about this whole glycemic index thing. It's just finding a balance of what works for you. And fundamentally, yeah, what's going to be sustainable in the long term. So if that means having more fast acting sugars and you have no problem maintaining a calorie deficit, fly at her, go for it. The data, like I said, is kind of evolving in that area. But even then, we still got a long way to go to really figure it all out and how much of a difference that's really going to make. And again, it's going to be, okay, if we reduce your risk of having a heart attack or we help you to live longer, but you're eating a bunch of foods that you don't enjoy, well, now we've got to look at quality versus quantity. So being that a big focus, and what I always aim for is go for the quality of life and versus the quantity aspect. When doing keto, I've heard there's a point you get to a stall. why does it happen, and what advice to break the weight loss stall? So basically, any diet that you go on, any kind of weight loss journey that you engage in, there's going to be a stall. There is going to be a point where you're just not going to lose any more weight. And what essentially has happened there is that, here's your calories going out, here's your calories in. So calories going out are more than the calories going in. You're losing weight, losing weight, losing weight, losing weight, losing weight. And eventually what's going to happen is the calories going in and the calories going out are going to be the same. What's going to happen there is you're going to stall. You're not going to lose any more weight because you're not in a calorie deficit. So this is not just the keto, this is any kind of diet, any kind of weight loss process. So that's essentially what's going to happen in that respect. And to overcome that, well, I always have two questions that I ask my patients. And the first one is, are we eating the least amount of calories possible that we honestly enjoy? So is there tweaks and changes? Maybe we're having cream in our coffee. Maybe we're having, I don't know, a snack here and there or something like that. But do we need to have that? Do we need to have that extra amount? Or can we mitigate that? Or can we decrease it? Something like that. If you can, if the answer is yes, you can, okay, then we can create a further calorie deficit and we might be able to lose more weight. If you can't, then okay, we can't. So the next question will be, well, are you doing the most amount of activity that you can on a day-to-day basis that you honestly enjoy? And if the answer is no, I could do more activity. I could add another session here and still enjoy it. That's the key part. And yeah, okay. So now we've been able to increase our activity levels and further created more of a calorie deficit potentially, and then more weight loss may occur at that point in time. But again, if you're not enjoying it, if you're not enjoying these processes, then it doesn't matter because you'll make some changes and you'll be able to keep it short term and you'll lose weight for a little period of time. But ultimately, you're going to gain the weight back because it's not going to be sustainable long term for you. So if you answered no, that you are eating the least amount of calories you can and you are doing the most amount of activity you can and really enjoy it on a day to day, then that might be the weight. That would be what we call your best weight, the weight that you are living and that you reach when you are living the healthiest lifestyle you possibly can that you honestly enjoy. So that's kind of that mindful component to kind of take in as well. The other piece of it would be kind of like I talked about earlier with the metabolic adaptation and maybe taking a diet break and going into maintenance. That might help. Again, the data is evolving in that area and we don't have really a whole lot of concrete data in it yet. We've got some good stuff, but it's all coming and needs a little bit more teasing out and stuff like that to figure out the specifics. A lot of great questions tonight. Okay, so to be in a calorie deficit, is it sufficient to consume less than the basal metabolic rate calories? Say BMR is 2,100 calories. If 17 to 1,800 calories, would this be sufficient calorie deficit? So I think you're kind of mixing up potentially the BMR, well, just in general. So basal metabolic rate or resting metabolic rate, that's how much calories your body needs just to exist on a day-to-day. So if you did nothing but lay in bed and sleep all day, that is how many calories you're going to burn during that day. And so that's just to keep your heart beating, your lungs moving, your digestive tract going, your brain happy, all those sorts of things. So I never recommend going anywhere near your BMR or below your BMR, because if you do go below your BMR, you're essentially not providing your body with enough fuel and nutrients just to function on a day-to-day basis. And that's going to cause all kinds of problems and issues for you down the road in terms of rebounding, not being able to manage the weight long term and that sort of thing. It's just never, never, ever going to be sustainable for you. And your body is going to fight back. Biology always wins, and it will find a way to get you to gain any weight that you lose, but also not lose any further weight. So BMR, I think when you're going into a calorie deficit, I always say start with where you're at. So collect some data, find out how much you're eating on a day-to-day basis, on a on a day-to-day, on a week-to-week, how much are you eating in a day? And look at your everything, write it all down, collect all the data and say, well, where can we make some changes? Can we reduce the cream in our coffee? Can we do less evening snacking? Can we do, mid-afternoon snacks so we eat less before dinner? That sort of thing. And then kind of start figuring out your calorie deficit from there in terms of, hey, I made this tweak, so now I'm consuming about this amount of calories per week. And I've done this for a couple of weeks. No change. Okay, so maybe I can tweak something else. Okay, now I'm a little bit lower. Say you went from 2000 and you're at 1950, and then you go from 1950 to 1900. And it's like, oh, hey, we're starting to see some movement. The scale's going down a little bit. My clothes are fitting looser, blah, 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 blah. and kind of figuring out your calorie deficit there versus kind of setting a hard number in the sand and saying, I need to go for that. I tend to kind of work backwards from where you're at, see what tweaks and changes you can make. And ultimately, that's going to be a much, much more sustainable process and method, in my opinion, anyways. Is it true if you eat protein calories, the body uses about 1/4 to 1/3 to break it down and store it as fat versus carbs or fats? No. Therefore, 100 excess calories of protein will lead to less fat storage than 100 excess calories of fat or carbs. Therefore, 100 excess calories of protein, less fat storage than 100 excess. No. So fundamentally, if your body is in a calorie excess, it's going to take those excess calories, whether it's protein, carbs, what have you, and it's going to store it as fat. Anything that's extra is going to get stored as fat. Now, there might be some changes depending on how much, weightlifting or training and stuff that you're doing, maybe, but overall, if you're in excess amount of calories, it's going to get stored as fat. That's just, again, that's that calorie deficit. That's the law of thermodynamics. You can't get around it by eating more protein and vice versa and stuff. I do recommend higher protein diets because they can definitely be beneficial in helping with satiety and all those sorts of things. But in general, that eating more protein, and if it's in excess, it's going to be stored as fat. So hope that answers that question. Awesome. I think that's all the questions, guys, unless you guys have any more or anything like that. Let me know if you didn't get a chance to ask your question or another one comes up. Feel free to email me, reach me on my various platforms. Like I said, probably the Facebook page or Instagram at the official Dr. Dan are the easiest places to get a hold of me and reach me, just because I have a little bit more control on those ones versus say like TikTok and stuff like that, where things get lost in the comments. But yeah, I look forward to our next webinar, which is happening March 17th. Wear green. I believe that's St. Patrick's Day. So we'll be talking about intermittent fasting. But very excited. And thank you very much for everyone for coming out and joining us. And I hope you all have a